Welcome to Advisor Advocates. Garrett Layell with Ed Meek and James Alexander of Edge Financial Advisors out of Chicago. Thank you guys for doing this one, man. I'm kind of pumped about this.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Garrett. It's nice to meet you recently and look forward to providing some helpful information in the world that we play in.
So you guys specialize in your practice in defined benefit plans, and that's one of your focus areas. So defined benefit plans, if I could say this briefly, it's a part of the market that I always wanted to get into, but couldn't find people with enough money to take advantage of it. It's a perfect world to get into, because when you do find that ideal client, man, it's a slam dunk conversation. It's such a cool thing that very few people know about, but it's finding the people that really qualify can be a challenge. So tell me a little bit about what defined benefit is and how it plays in with defined contribution and deferred compensation. And there's different ways we can kick money down the road. Kind of differentiate those a little bit for me if you could.
Well, I think probably the best way to frame it would be kind of how did I get involved in just like doing it for clients. And, just like you had referred, there's really two main types of retirement plans that people can take advantage of that will help them propel their savings in a quicker way. And the primary way of doing it is by avoiding taxes. So you can put more money in, you'll have more money to grow on your behalf. The first one is this defined contribution plan, which some people might be familiar with the term, might not, but these are your traditional 401k, 403b, your normal retirement plans that are available through either the company you own or the company you work at, and they're awesome. But if you make a significant amount of money, you're capped at what you can put in. If you're over 50, it's just a little over $30,000 a year. If you're under 50, I think, what is it, 22.5 or 23.5, kind of in that range. And so if one is at a place in life where they are making more money than they're spending, and they would like to invest the difference, if they don't have a plan that's going to avoid taxes, their take home is now 75, 70, 65% of what they made. And so I actually have a client that owns an actuarial company and actuarial software for actuaries that provide all the calculations for the other type of retirement plan, which is what's called a defined benefit plan. And this has been around for a very, very long time. It is one where we'd always heard when we were younger, Garrett, people lived on their pension. And in reality, it's the same gist. Companies can set aside money for employees, and they put aside the money, they get a big tax benefit by putting the money in there, and then they create a lump sum that lump sum then is used to be able to give somebody a pension the rest of their lives. It doesn't exist as much anymore, but what does exist is the ability to still do that, where you don't actually have to take a pension off of it. You can just set aside this money on a pre-tax basis, and it can accumulate to a very large lump sum. And then you can actually just take that lump sum and put it into an IRA. Just like when people retire, if they have the defined contribution plan and they save $250,000, $500,000, million, or whatever, they can take that out of their 401k plan, put it in an IRA, and then people like you and me and James, we can then help them live off of that. What this client of mine did was started educating me on, when he was saying, you've got some of these clients that make a lot of money, that have a lot of money, they're paying all this tax and they want to invest it. Why don't you have them look into these? And so he educated me on it. And around 10 years ago, maybe not quite 10 years ago, I helped a friend of mine who's a doctor who makes $1 million a year set up one of these. And he will now retire probably 2 to 3 years earlier, 100% because of all the money he saved on taxes. The big macro picture is people do these plans if they make enough money and they can set aside another chunk. And James and I kind of come up with at least, 50 to 100,000 a year that you can afford to set aside in addition to your 401k. It might be something you want to look at.
Watching your podcast that talked about this, where defined contribution, the rules define how much you contribute, hence defined contribution. Defined benefit is the rules define how much the end benefit is. So if you understand a little bit about financial math and time value of money formulas, it's one's defining the amount that's going in, the other's defining how much you can take out down the road. But I didn't really think about this part of it. I guess the IRS or the tax code determines what the limit is to what I can put into my 401k. I guess that is also the code that is determining what the maximum benefit can be here. So there's not a cap on how much I can put into the defined benefit plan per year, but there's a cap on how much I can have as the end benefit.
That's right. Yeah. So that cap changes every year, to your point, Garrett. So it'll go up slowly with inflation and what they decide. But right now it's $3.5–4 million pot at the end. There's no cap today. It's you can't go over that at the end. And one of the things that is so nice about these plans is, yes, you're creating a pension, but you are in charge of it all. And so there's time frame. You might need to have 5 to 7 years to get to $3.5 million at the end. That's a lot of money you need to put in if you want to max it out. And that's the difference, is you might be able to put in $250,000, $350,000, $1,000 a year in order to get to that cap that you want. And that's where people, when they look at that, they say, not only do I put that in and I accelerate my retirement timeline, but that's tax deferred money. I'm writing that off of my $800,000 income. That's a massive tax savings, but it allows you to stuff it.
Right. 2 examples. So I've got 2 clients. Both of them have been doing this plan for a little while. One, maybe he's been doing it around 6 years. And he is in his early 40s. So he started at kind of in his mid to late 30s. His cap, he wasn't able to put as much in as this other client of mine. And the reason is because he was like 36 or 37 years old. And the earliest age that maximum benefit that James mentioned, the maximum benefit is if you're 62 and you've been funding this, the most you can have in it is 3.5 million today. Now you can wait to have the 3.5 when you're older, but 62 is the earliest. So if we just use 62 as an example, and he's 36 or 37 years old, that's 25 years that he can accumulate to get to 3.5 million. So just certain calculations say you can only put in so much money at a certain rate of return that will get you to 3.5 million. So that's a smaller amount. It's still a nice amount. I think we put in like 60 or 70 his first year. And every year you can put in a little bit more. That's one client. Another client of mine, he had changed jobs. All of a sudden, he became self-employed and he started making a lot of money. Last year, he put in $500,000. And the reason is he started when he was 55. He's almost 60. He only had 7 years to get the 3.5 million. So he could start writing these real big checks to kind of catch up and get to the 3.5 million. So it's a shorter period of time. So it just depends on someone's circumstances of how old they are, when they're looking to retire. And so we have to take all these things into account to determine how much we can put in. So some people would love to put in $500,000, but they just can't. And some people, most people can't put in $500,000, right? That's an exorbitant amount of money. But if somebody else put in an extra $1,000,000 or 100 or 150, there's a very high likelihood that they'll be able to do it.
How does this coordinate with your 401k contribution, or does it? Are they completely standalone?
It does. Good question, Garrett. It does coordinate. So if you have a defined benefit and a 401k, as long as it's for the same company, your firm, your small business, they're coupled together, and there's a couple nuanced rules. Within those rules, we haven't had any clients have issues with them. That's worth mentioning. It's not a big deal adhering to different rules, but the 401k maxes you, I think this year it's $72,500 with all those different types of codings and contributions, the deferral, the matching, the profit sharing, et cetera. When you couple the 401k with the defined benefit plan, that profit sharing coding is limited. And so instead of it being $72,500, I'm going to pick a number. It all depends on the formula, but it might be 50 or 55,000, the max you can put in that 401k, because you have a defined benefit. And so we say, look, just don't put in this much, adhere to these rules on the 401k side, but we'll make up for it on this side. And it's all tax deferred money. You're getting the same tax benefits, but let's just skin the cat appropriately. It's all kosher and legal, and it's working through those numbers.
Someone, who's like self-employed, an individual, they might have an individual 401k, or maybe they have, they pay their spouse, maybe they have an employee or two. If they don't want to invest or can't really invest more than that 70 to 75,000, that's kind of like the maximum you can kind of jam into the 401k. If they're like, we'd really like to put in 100, if we could, 125, 150. If we start seeing those dollar amounts, that's when we go, all right, let's explore a defined benefit plan coupled, like James said, coupled with the defined contribution plan. But if it's still in that range of, I really wouldn't put in more than 50 or 75, then they can accomplish it with the 401k.
How much you're going to be able to put in per year is going to also depend on some type of an assumed rate of return, and that's not set in stone, I don't believe, correct? There is some flexibility there.
There is, yeah. There's an assumed rate of return which needs to be conservative by nature. Going again, this is an equivalent of a pension. So volatility is your enemy in this plane. There has to be some form of volatility for growth. You can't have guaranteed rates of return unless you create insurance contracts within that program, which most people don't want to do. That said, there's an assumed rate of return, and the advisor's goal, our job, is to adhere to that rate of return within the strategies that we implement. We want to create more of a consistency of that return instead of higher returns with more volatility. That's a huge component of it. People who create defined benefit plans on their own, they have to, they take on responsibility for the investment structure, and that's super important. Because what happens is, if I have a rate of return of say 5 or 6%, which is standard, the actuaries set that up. It's pretty standard, right around that range. And I buy all stocks, and 2022 happened, and my account's down 25%, 30%. Well, the actuary now is going to run those numbers and say the assumed rate of return is 5%, but you're down 25. And so we have to catch up even more the next year, fund it way more to get to that target dollar amount because we got a lot less money. And often what happens with businesses is if the economy's down, and the stock market's down, my business is probably down. Can I fund $70,000 more than I had planned based on, that scenario? And so it's very important that the return metrics are consistent and stable. And that's where, again, that strategy towards those investments is critical.
One thing to kind of couple with that is there's also this flexibility. So there's this range that people can, contribute each year. And there's what's called the target range, which is what James is alluding to, is assuming a certain rate of return. The target would be if you put money in this year and it always averaged 5% every single year, we know that this would be the payment this year. It would be perfect. We know that that's not the case because, the markets go up and down. But there is this minimum that you can put in, because if somebody's wanting to get to that $3.5 million maximum at a certain age, there's a target you have to put in. But there's some years, like if you don't have a good year and you don't make as much money and you're like, man, it's going to be pretty tough to put in. I thought I was going to put in 100 or 125 a year. I might only be able to do 50 or 75 this year. You do have flexibility to put in minimum amounts sometimes. And then when good years happen, you can put in higher than target amounts. So we do have the flexibility to be able to kind of put it in a range. And lastly, if for some reason somebody just can't do it even in that range, you can amend the plan and adjust downward or upward that benefit, because some people don't even pick the 3.5 million as a benefit. They may go, hey, if I could eventually get 2 million in that thing, that'd be great. So then the calculations are based upon that. So there is flexibility with the plan. What we also do is we usually like to help people kind of have this, because it isn't their only investment. Usually it's part of, other people have accumulated other investments. Either they might be in retirement accounts, they may be outside of retirement accounts. So what we want to do is if we know that this is going to be a little more conservative, then we help them manage their money or make sure that their other money is complementing this. So we look at, okay, overall, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, we want to have 2/3 of your money in stocks, 1/3 of your money in more conservative investments. Well, if this is going to be conservative in general, let's just make this really conservative and we'll be more aggressive over here. And then that actually allows Garrett, like you said, like, hey, if this is a little more conservative, then I can put more money into this. So there creates that flexibility too. So there's a lot of variables, kind of a lot of things that are going on. But if we look at it the right way, we can minimize taxes, keep the investment mix the same, and have a lot of flexibility.
What happens if we end up accidentally getting it to 3.5 or 3.6 million because the investment's overperformed? Does that ever happen? Is it possible? And what happens if that does happen?
It has happened. In fact, we have a client that's happened to. If that happens, it's a good problem to have. There are some rules that say if you have it overfunded, then they can actually have some penalties. But if you keep the plan going, and if you do happen to have some people connected, like a spouse or whatever, there's ways to kind of minimize that. There's so many ways that can go that it's hard to like give a blanket answer. So
there's always, I shouldn't say always, but 9 times out of 10, there's a workaround to avoid any problems financially with it. You might need to keep it open a little longer. You might need to add an employee, but it's a happy problem. And it can happen.
And that $3.5 million, that cap of the benefit, that's per employee. Because obviously it's not going to be for the entire plan, because you could have 50 employees. $3.5 million split 50 ways isn't a whole lot of money. So that's per employee. Is your limit.
In short, yes. And then there's categories of employees people can do, and it's really based also on compensation for the employee. So there's a lot of variables that will spare the details, but yes, it's per individual, in short.
I was going to say there's a version that James was kind of talking about here, that it's a version of a defined benefit plan, like he was saying, that there's different levels where we're doing this primarily, or somebody would be primarily doing this for themselves, or maybe their spouse or the executives at the company. If they have other employees, they don't actually have to put proportionally as much of a dollar amount based on what they make. They can actually create a lower level. They still give them a benefit, so the employees still get something. But there is a little bit of ability to discriminate, where in the 401k plans, the defined contribution plans, you can't really discriminate. But in these, you can to a certain extent. So you can jam a lot in. Like, this doctor, he wrote a check for $200,000 recently. About $18,000 was for employees. The rest was for him and his wife. So that's a pretty good trade-off, because he saved himself, $60,000 in taxes, and it cost him $18,000, actually to a benefit of his employees, which love him because he has this great retirement plan for them.
Who's really going to be able to take the most advantage of defined benefit plans?
Yeah.
Aside from the fact that they're in the Chicago area. Chicago's great, but we have clients all across the country. Once they hear about this, it's nationwide because of the ruling. So qualifications, certainly the older one is, the more it makes sense, typically in their 50s or 60s. High income earners, so 300K, 400K plus in income. In addition to that, having a small business or an independent contractor or someone to that effect that has not a lot of employees, as we had talked about. The more employees you have, the more you have to contribute, the less it probably makes sense for you as the business owner. And so if you fit the bill of a significant amount of income, in your 50s or 60s, and you own a business or pay 1099 contract, you want to seriously look at this. Because people will ask it when we have these conversations with potential clients about this. They ask us, this sounds too good to be true. What is the catch? And the catch is you have to qualify. That's it. And if you don't qualify, we don't have an answer for you. If you do, it's a no-brainer.
Those are the primary, most of the type of clients that we have. Then there is sometimes the outliers where, like, a spouse works and has self-employed income, even if they make 50 or 100 a year, not even, I mean, that's a lot, but like they can just put the whole thing in a defined benefit plan. So it's all, if you come across a scenario or you're a person who has this extra chunk of money that you'd like to not pay taxes on to Uncle Sam and have it grow on your benefit, then you should at least talk to us. You get this monster huge tax break up front. But imagine you put in 150 grand a year and it saves you, I don't know, 60 or 70 grand in taxes, and you do that for 10 years. You now have set aside $600,000 to $700,000 that's in your name, that was Uncle Sam's, and then growing. And that becomes $1 million to $2 million someday. Like, you literally have this huge extra chunk of money that you can live off of 100% because you just saved a bunch of money in taxes. That is the master superpower of this kind of plan. It's not just the tax benefit initially, it's the monster tax benefit later on. There
are a lot of areas where, people can do it. You you can see this video, you can watch some other content. It's like, yeah, okay, that's great. These are experts, but I can do it myself. Defined benefit something. You don't want to be messing around trying to do that yourself. Like you really can't. If you want to go pick your own stocks, knock yourself out. Open a Schwab account and go do it. If you want to go say, there are ways to do your own financial planning to some extent. I mean, I'm a CFP and I wouldn't try to open my own defined benefit plan. You know what I mean? There's a lot of moving parts in there that you really do. You need a specialist and an expert to help you with that.
Yeah, you need the accountant, which is easy. The accountant just wants to know how much you put in, but you need the actuary for sure. I mean, that's something for sure. And then having a financial advisor like us or someone like us who actually knows that. We're really kind of what we position ourselves when we tell people is we're like the quarterback of all of these different parties, because then you have to make sure you manage the money correctly. So you're not like having that massive swing of like, I don't even know how much I'm supposed to contribute because I did too, I lost a whole bunch of money, like James said, in a bad year.